Well, hey guys, Gary Jenkins here, retired Kansas City Police Intelligence Unit detective, back with episode number 2 of my interview with Bill Ouseley, a retired FBI agent. When he retired here to Kansas City. If you watched the last one, I said a lot about Bill. Just want you to know that he was the big guy in the organized crime world in Kansas City, shall we say. He was a case agent for the skimming cases from the Kansas City Inn. He ended up being the supervisor of the one squad, or the OC squad, organized crime squad. We worked with him hand in glove over the years, did many, many things with Bill, passed him a lot of information on. He passed a lot of information back to us so we could work together and do these investigations when it came to the Sabella family in Kansas City. Today, he's going to talk about the Sabella family and narcotics and how the narcotics operation developed in Kansas City.
Anslinger is director of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, is going after the trade routes. Of course, they got narcotics agents in the various cities. They're establishing what's going on abroad. And at the same time, the Italian-Sicilian group, which is organized into what we call Cosa Nostra, they're dipping their fingers into the drugs and making it a major operation. Anslinger, his organization, is truly the only one. I mean, some local police departments were involved, certainly, but on a federal basis, they were the mainstay. So while he's in working, the mob is working, and Anslinger's job is getting harder as they get better. What happened in Kansas City is our organization that consolidated during Prohibition, seeing the end of Prohibition, the powers to be decide that losing alcohol, they would replace it by going big time into a drug operation. And it was called the Kansas City Narcotics Syndicate. Our narcotics agent here, who was instrumental in breaking it up, he had another name for it, I forget right now, but it was like a subsidiary of the mob, which is what it was. They appointed one of the original founders of the organization, a guy named Joe DeLuca, and he was given the job of putting this together, he and his brother, Frank. They put it together on a business basis. This wasn't going to be just supplying a few little people here or there or supplying Kansas City's drug pool. No, this was going to be as big as they could possibly make it. So they had managers, supervisors, legal people, bookkeepers, salespeople, other representatives. They had the whole thing. They had the whole ball of wax put together as you would a business organization. They established their trade routes, where they would get the drugs from. Their drugs were coming from Sicily. The opium deal in the Orient, which was the original main supplier, that sort of dried up, at least in the sense of what the mob was doing. I think because they had greater contacts with the French and the Italian Mafia in Sicily. They've established their trade routes, and very skeletonly, I will mention what they did. They had supervisors looking after local salespeople who were making drug sales. They had a courier who went to Tampa. The drugs that were coming in through the French connection and the Italians in Sicily, coming into Cuba. Cuba had a go-between, a Cuban politico, who was also a internationally known drug dealer. The drugs went from him to the Antonori brothers in Tampa. Our courier would go down to Tampa, bring the drugs back. They would be distributed to our salespeople, and they were covering all of the states adjacent to us, plus California, and wherever they could establish a contact. That was the skeleton of the narcotics industry, and later Anslinger identified it as one of the earliest large-scale, truly organized narcotics syndicate in the United States.
Interesting. I'm looking through your book here, and one of the early stories here, everything's old is new again, about this car chase in 1923. You had two well-dressed young men speeding wildly up and down the streets in a high-powered car, caught the attention of the police. An investigation filed to see who they were, did a little surveillance on them. They ended up forcing their way into a residence that they caught them at, or they got in it and found 4 new car tires there. And so they brought the tires in, and they thought they were stolen. And they also found a suitcase there, which when they opened it up, it had a large quantity of morphine, cocaine, and opium, value of $3,500. So they just stumbled onto one of the first big drug busts in Kansas City by accident. It sounds like you think that was all by accident.
No, actually, you're describing the beginning of a narcotics investigation. As we well know, working in organized crime, you develop intelligence. You take one thing that happened, hope to connect it with something else, and this guy belongs to him, and what have you. So what happened is when they arrested Tony Gizzo, who was the driver of the car and would one day be the Kansas City mob boss, and I might mention, even though preceding the syndicate, many of these guys were dealing drugs, but not on this basis. It wasn't new to them. The narcotics agents were making buys. As I said, last episode, they were the first to work undercover, make buys, develop informants, and work off of intelligence, develop a scheme of things. Gradually, they're making buys here. They don't know that this is part of this national syndicate. Not in the beginning. But soon, as it happens, A becomes connected to B comes connected to C. This guy belongs to that. They seize a suitcase that belongs to Pete DiGiovanni, one of the big guys in the back who are running things through Joe DeLuca. So now is a connection to the mob hierarchy. And then 2 things happened. They got a tip about the name Nicola, and that's all they knew, connected to drugs. Well, Nick Impastato was the on-the-street CEO. But they didn't know who he was. They didn't know what this meant. But it was in the back of their head. So that was one thing. The second thing that happened is in 39, a guy by the name of Nicola Gentili, he was a fascinating character in his own right. He became one of the other large narcotics syndicate, and he had ties to Kansas City. They were operating mainly in the South. So he and his partner come up to Kansas City, and they try to sell their drugs to Kansas City. Kansas City says, you know what? We don't need your drugs. We're bigger than that. But if you want to buy anything we have left over, we'll be happy to sell you. They say, good, we'll do that. They go home. The same year, Gentili is arrested, and in his dress book is the name Nicole Impastato. Now there's another connection. This is a big deal. Who's this Impastato? Little by little, they're putting this together. Then they see the big picture, and they go from there. And I might mention, because before I let you see where you want to go with this, a fella by the name of Caramusa had taken over as the drug courier. Once the indictments were brought down, which they were, Caramusa turned state's evidence, became a cooperating witness. That was a huge break for the narcotics people. And so they convicted 13 or 14 people. That little vignette with the Gizzo guy in a car connected with a lot of undercover buys, and the dots were connected, and it exposed a sophisticated, well-organized, one seizure on today's market would have been over $500,000. That was just one suitcase in one house. I think the figure of some $12 million a year in 1940.
Wow, that was a lot of money in 1940. And so Caramusa, now he was going to Tampa and picking up loads of heroin and bringing them back up to Kansas City.
That was the route they established. They had some other connections, but the primary one was through the Antinoris. They were indicted, by the way, in the case, and later the main Antinori brother was murdered. There were 4 people in this case that were murdered, which is also interesting, including Caramusa.
Was he? And there is a side story about Caramusa and the intimidation of him, and I remembered that name from back in the old days before that and what happened. So why don't you tell folks that side story?
Well, there are two things that happened with Caramusa. First, his 12-year-old brother, back in the early days of the Black Hand, riding on a pushcart with his father, this Black Hander shotgunned the little boy to death. It was a major thing. But there again, the fear of the Black Hand, no one came forward. The police knew who did it and went after him, but he, as it happened, escaped. So this Caramusa may have had that in his mind when he decided, I'm going to cooperate. The fellow who they believe killed him was a guy named Catanzaro. The trial is going on. They call Caramusa to the witness, and you who've seen The Godfather will see this replayed in The Godfather. Yes. They bring this Catanzaro into the courtroom, and Caramusa knows that this is the guy that killed his brother. And they sit him right in the front row, and through hand signals and glaring, and he went into the whole routine to intimidate Caramusa. This was right out of the Sicilian Mafia book from Sicily. Finally, it got to the point that they had to eject him from the courthouse.
Wow. So you say Caramusa ended up getting killed in the end?
Caramusa, there was no witness protection then. And so Caramusa moved to Chicago. He changed his name and went to Chicago, was running a business up there and all that. One day he spots this car and he knows that he's being stalked. He's trying desperately to get a hold of Claude Fulmer, the narcotics agent here. Fulmer can't get to him in time, and he's shotgunned to death, leaving his residence in front of his daughters. They caught up with him. They think that the shooters were from Tampa.
Talk a little bit more about this Nicolai Gentile.
Yeah.
What was his base? Was it New Orleans? Was he connected with the family down in New Orleans?
Well, I outline in the book, if anybody's interested in this character, he had a big play in Kansas City. It's one of the first stops when he emigrated here. And it's a funny story. He ending up in Kansas City from a little nowhere place in Sicily. The buildings and the people, and he was overcome with the place. He had nobody to talk to. He didn't know anybody, or he did know one person, his brother, but his brother wasn't there. He was working in Topeka. So Gentile had connections here, and he graduated and was considered the traveling emissary of the fledgling mafia here. He would travel around and troubleshoot. He would travel around and negotiate disputes. He would be connected to this family. He'd be connected to that family. He'd come back to Kansas City, worked for the mob. So he became like a national figure in the burgeoning early Cosa Nostra. And what happened in his life, he eventually, due to financial problems and what have you, was hooked up with this major drug operator. They formed a partnership, and they were operating out of New Orleans. This was towards the end of his career. When he was arrested, he was then deported. But his blue book, his black book, was an important link to the Kansas City Narcotics Syndicate. And he came up here because of his earlier ties and knowledge of these people.
Interesting. You never know how it works and how people make one connection, and then later on it comes back to, then it makes everything understandable once you learn about that earlier connection. So
yeah.
It's you got to study the history of organized crime in order to know what's going on today. I learned that a long time ago.
Well, it's so complex and so interrelated. There are family ties. There are old country ties. There's intercity ties. It's funny how, one city will have strong ties in some cities and none in another, mainly because as the investigations came about and law enforcement became involved after the Appalachian meeting, these guys couldn't just all get together. And it's not like a big cookout where the families get together. Oh, Kansas City's having a cookout with Chicago, and we all know each other. But there are always ties somewhere. And if they don't know someone in Chicago, they know someone in St. Louis who knows someone in Chicago.
Well, I actually do stuff like that myself today.
Sure. It's
human nature, I guess, isn't it?
Networking.
Networking, yeah, exactly. Good word. I couldn't think of the word. Good word, networking.
Yeah.
So as we move on up into World War II, things kind of usually go down on, not maybe the down low, but it gets really hard to do these kinds of things during World War II. The whole world was caught up in that. Kind of what happened? What was the progression of the Kansas City Narcotics Syndicate on into the war and after the war in the early 50s?
For all intents purposes, and for whatever reasons, the powers to be that ran the mob here, it appears that with the takedown of the narcotics syndicate, sending these people to jail, they deported 2 people. That Impastato was deported, and another guy, Simone, who was one of the couriers before Caramusa, deported. Joe DeLuca sentenced to jail, and they attempted to deport him, but he beat that case on a technicality. It appears that the effect of that was to squash any thoughts of reviving this or staying in narcotics on a major basis. Because I know during my time and your time, that was not one of their menus on their menu, and I could not find anything indicating that after the 1940 indictments and prosecutions, that any attempt was made to deal on this scale.
Interesting. I guess I didn't really realize that, but like you said, during my time, I'd never heard of it. Only people on the periphery were involved, but never anybody who was anybody never was anything connected. Now, Junior Bradley was on the periphery, and he really was heavily involved in his own way. But
there's a story, and I think most of it is legend. The part of the story is true. The impact I don't know about, but Tony Gizzo, that guy in the cattle in the yellow sports car, becomes the boss in 1950. He brings Nick Savella in as his number one man. Nick had fled to Chicago because they had been trying to kill him. Now he's been rehabbed. Gizzo's son, Robert, was a dead bang addict and was no end of problem to Gizzo. It was well known what the narcotics had done to this kid. And so the legend is Nick, being a close associate, having had contact with Robert probably, maybe trying to put out a fire for Gizzo. He supposedly used that as a signal that this is not good stuff. I think combined with that is some of the draconian sentences that were coming out of the Harrison Act in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. But for whatever reason, it appears, and I think we can attest to that, that Nick was not going to dabble directly as a family operation in drugs.
Interesting. Yeah, but on a national basis, now I don't remember any of my readings or study indicating that Chicago, the outfit, did much in this area after the war. New York, and particularly the people that got involved in the French Connection in the end, and the Bonanno family and the Gambino family both, when John Gotti took it over, they were all heavily involved in this whole French Connection thing. We did a story on the French Connection, and they were heavily involved in that. Carmine Galante was in jail, or just got put in jail about that time, and he was, he'd been the underboss, and he got a 20-year sentence about 1960 or 61. So for some reason, it was a little bit different back in New York, because they did not. They continued as a mob family, La Cosa Nostra family. Both those families continued to be involved in the major importation of narcotics.
Well, that's true. And what's funny about that is that they put out the word that we don't do drugs, the bosses, but elements and parts of the family did it, and they don't ask, don't tell. And they were heavily involved, as you say. Galante was known as the drug king. That was his thing, was drugs. And they were hoping to revive even a bigger drug cartel when he was shotgunned in a restaurant and killed by these guys they called the Zips. These were Sicilian Mafia guys sent over here to operate on our soil doing drug cartels and to associate themselves where they could with the crime families. I don't know about Chicago and drugs. I haven't really looked into it. I'd be surprised if they didn't do any, but I don't think they're noted for it. Others who know Chicago would know more. There's no question that Cosa Nostra was heavily involved in drugs and the importation of just every form of drug you could, marijuana and whatever it was. They had a habit of also turning these things over and gaining the benefit and not any of the risk. For example, motorcycle gangs were associated with some mob families, and they got their drugs from them. They did all the work and cut the mob in. In some of the black neighborhoods, they went to the resident black gang leader and formed relationships. So they were at it full scale.
Exactly, and even in Kansas City, is our own Junior Bradley. He formed a relationship with one of the black kingpins of Kansas City, Terry Kelton. While he was in the joint when this was going on. Junior always had connections with people in the joint.
Yeah.
Did you ever notice that?
Yeah.
He had this immense network within the federal penitentiary system, and he was supplying the money, and Kelton had all these contacts out here, and had been involved with a heroin operation, was turned into a cocaine operation into the 70s, and then he would put that money out in the street, so to speak, and they'd go buy their drugs and make the money, and then Junior would get a big piece of that back, and Kelton would.
Yeah.
He was so heavily involved with them, he even participated. Kelton wanted to have, I believe, his wife killed. And Bradley even participated in that, kind of trying to set up a hit on his wife, because I think she was going to testify or something. I don't have all the details.
Yeah.
You may remember that. I don't remember if you were still here. Were you retired by then?
No, that happened. Yeah. Well, we also had one of our guys who we believe he was a Shylock, and we believe that what he was doing was lending money to some of the people. And, he could go, his answer was, I didn't know what they were doing with it. Everybody had one other indicator to me that the Savella's mob wasn't involved. There would have been no other people if they were. There would have been no Keltons, not the Jamaicans. I don't know if the Bloods came here, but the Jamaicans were heavy. Those guys would have been suppressed. And they were a lot, to Nick, it was Leave it there.
Right.
We don't want it.
Yeah, I think Bradley it was a way for him to make money.
Right. And if it had gotten...
And like you say, he was loaning him money to do
Right,
that on
right.
probably at loan shark rates or then some.
Right. And if he had gotten too far involved and it made a wave for Nick, they would have killed him.
He would have been gone, yeah.
Kansas City is like a big village.
Yeah.
And the Italian community is even more tighter, knit. And I believe that it was Nick's feeling that they would be ostracized, they would lose any support. A politician would not want to be backed by somebody that was dealing drugs. And it was important for him, as you know, all of us who worked organized crime, interviewing people in that community, they didn't know anything about. There's no mafia here. We don't know anything about that. Never happened. How about this? No. How about this politician who's doing it? He's a good guy.
He's a good guy. Yeah, I've heard that. I don't know how many times. He's a good guy.
Yeah. Now, if it had been the other way, and the church, they're going to church people, the priest and all this is saying our kids are becoming addicted through it would have ruined. I mean, it would have been a big issue for Nick in this small community.
Yeah, because it is small.
Yep.
In that world, especially. I mean, I played golf with a really good guy whose sister was the gal that bought that gun that Corky ended up with. I won't mention any names, but I know you know the deal.
Yeah.
And he's a good guy, and he's square John as anything. And who knows? I mean, it's such a small world in Kansas City.
Sure. Yeah. Well, they've supported him, and not supported him in that way, but supported him in the sense it wasn't like a direct support, but indirectly by ignoring it, by denying it, by not ostracizing these people. That was important to Nick.
Yeah. Well, this has been interesting.
One final item is indicative of what happened to Cosa Nostra totally. When the traditions were ignored, the new breed came in. These weren't true Cosa Nostra people. Greed, power, and all. At the end of, while I was retired, many of the cases that started to come to the federal courthouse were some of, in fact, if you remember, Tony Savella's son
his nephew.
was indicted and involved in distribution. That's the generational change. If things had continued on, we may have seen a drug organization because they didn't believe in any of this business of being careful, keeping a good profile. The youth, what ruined Cosa Nostra.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, our guys actually worked that case on that young, unrighteous kid. He was just a dumbass, two-bit, kind of hanging out in the disco bar scene, selling little bits of cocaine.
The progression or the digression of the mob. What I saw one day, and I said, "Look at this." I remember when they all had suits and ties. They were businessmen like everybody else, and even when the ties went out, they were well dressed. I remember when it was the leather jacket era. They all had leather jacket and Sandsabel slacks
and polo shirts and leather jackets. Yes,
yeah, but they looked good. They Nick didn't allow beards or mustaches. They had to. Then there was a thing in one of the magazines of John Gotti Jr.
Oh, yeah.
and his followers. He had a wife beater T-shirt on. Yeah. He had muscles coming out of his ears, and he had Bermuda shorts that looked like they came from the Caribbean. And this was the mob boss.
Yes.
I said, it's over.
Really? And all the rest of them wore tracksuits with big gold chains around their neck.
That was one of the progressions. Yes. From into the tracksuits. Then it was into this. I don't know. I don't know what that style is called.
Really? Well, this has been fun. This has been illuminating and enlightening about the history of the narcotics investigation and narcotics law and how we got to where we are. And, Well, that was really interesting from Bill. I tell you what, he's a good guy. He is so knowledgeable about Kansas City Mafia and everything about it. You got to get his books if you haven't got them yet. Open City and Mobsters in Our Midst. I got links in my website, links to my website. I've got links down below in the show notes, which are on my website and also in your app and also on the YouTube. I really found this discussion with him interesting, and I hope you did too. So, guys, keep coming back, like and subscribe if you're watching me on YouTube, and tell your friends about it. Share it on your social media. I forget to do that kind of stuff. Trying to promote something here. I've got my own books out there for sale. Just go into Amazon if you're interested. Go into Amazon and run my name. There's some links down below, or just run my name and put the word mafia with it, and you'll find my books and DVDs that are for sale and for rent on Amazon Prime. I've got 3 of them on Amazon Prime that you can rent. They're about the Kansas City mob family. Guys, I really appreciate y'all tuning in, and keep coming back. Thanks, guys. Come back. Thanks, guys. Come back. Thanks, guys. Come back. Thanks, guys.